June 17, 1940, 2:47 a.m. The Sussex coastline near Cuckmere Haven. Home Guard volunteer Thomas Whitmore, 43 years old, crouched behind a barricade made from his neighbour's farm cart, 3 milk churns, and 40 feet of barbed wire he'd stolen from his own pasture. His rifle was a Canadian Ross from the last war that jammed every third shot. Between him and the expected German paratroopers landing at dawn were 17 other men. A postman, 2 grocers, a school teacher, a butcher, and 12 farmers, armed with 12 shotguns, 3 hunting rifles, 2 pistols from 1917, and 7 pitchforks. Britain had 27 divisions to defend 400 miles of coastline. Germany had 140 divisions waiting across the Channel. British intelligence estimated that invasion would begin within 48 hours. Prime Minister Churchill had given the order 3 days earlier. Every man will fight. Every village will resist. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost. But there were no costs left. The treasury was empty. The army's equipment sat abandoned on the beaches of Dunkirk. And the factories couldn't produce rifles fast enough to arm the 5 million men who'd volunteered for the Home Guard in the past 2 weeks. Before we continue with Thomas Whitmore's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Sussex, June 17, 1940, where Thomas Whitmore was about to discover that desperation breeds the deadliest kind of innovation. Thomas Whitmore had been a carpenter before the war, not a master craftsman, just a village carpenter who fixed doors, built shelves, and occasionally constructed a coffin when old Mrs. Patterson down the lane needed her services. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, had a limp from a tractor accident in 1936, and wore the same brown wool jacket every day because his wife had died 2 years earlier, and nobody reminded him to change clothes. He'd tried to enlist in September 1939, the day Britain declared war. The recruiting officer took one look at his limp and his age and laughed. "Go home, old man, grow potatoes. That's how you'll help." Thomas went home. He grew potatoes, and every night he listened to the BBC reporting British losses: Norway in April, the Netherlands in May, Belgium by May 28th, France collapsing by the hour. On June 4th, the last boats returned from Dunkirk. On June 14th, the Germans marched into Paris. On June 16th, France surrendered. On June 17th, Thomas received a telegram. His nephew, James Whitmore, aged 22, had died at Dunkirk. Machine gun fire, June 1st, 4th, 17 p.m., on the beach near Bray Dunes. James had wanted to be a doctor. He'd been accepted to Cambridge for autumn 1940. Thomas folded the telegram, placed it in his jacket pocket, and walked to the village hall where the newly formed Home Guard was meeting. "I'm here," he said. "What do you need?" The problem wasn't willingness to fight. Every village in southern England had more volunteers than weapons. The problem wasn't courage. These men had survived the last war, buried their friends, and now watched their sons die in this one. The problem was that the British Army had left 2 472 artillery pieces in France, 63, 879 vehicles, 76, 097 tons of ammunition, and 416, 00 tons of supplies. The factories were producing 400 rifles per week. The Home Guard needed 500, 00 immediately. Between June 18th and July 15th, 1940, German reconnaissance aircraft photographed British coastal defences 847 times. They saw the same thing in every photograph: nothing. No concrete bunkers, no tank traps, no minefields, no artillery positions. The Luftwaffe reported to Berlin, "British coast defenseless, invasion feasible within 72 hours. What they didn't see was what Thomas Whitmore was building. The night of June 18th, Thomas sat alone in his workshop. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about James on that beach, unarmed, waiting. Kept thinking about the German paratroopers who would land the same way, except this time Thomas would be the one waiting. He lit his oil lamp. opened his tool chest, started drawing. The problem was simple. The Home Guard had no anti-tank weapons, no grenades, no explosives. But Thomas had built things his entire life. He understood leverage, weight distribution, braking points. He understood that a German tank weighed 24 tons, moved at 25 miles per hour, and had 30mm armor on the sides. He understood that armor doesn't matter if you can stop the tracks. He worked for 4 hours. By 3:00 a.m. he had the design. Take a railway sleeper, solid oak, 8 feet long, 10 inches wide, weighs 200 pounds. Sharpen one end to a chisel point using a 2-man saw and an adze. Coat the point in axle grease mixed with sand to prevent rot. Dig a hole 4 feet deep at a 45-degree angle toward the expected enemy approach. Drop the sleeper in, point up, leaving 4 feet exposed. Pack the hole with rocks and dirt. Ram it solid. Repeat every 8 feet in a staggered pattern across a 400-yard front. Time required per obstacle, 17 minutes. Cost, nothing. The railway had thousands of old sleepers waiting to be burned. Thomas called them Whitmore's teeth. The next morning, he presented the design to Captain Reginald Ashford, the Home Guard commander, a retired postal inspector who'd never commanded anything larger than a sorting room. Ashford studied the drawing for 90 seconds. "The Army will never approve this. It's not in any manual, it's not proper defensive doctrine." "The Army isn't here," Thomas said. "We are." Ashford looked at the 17 men standing behind Thomas. They'd all lost someone at Dunkirk or in France. They all had shovels. "Fine," Ashford said, "but if this fails, it's your court-martial, not mine." Thomas started that afternoon. June 19th, 1940, 2:00 p.m. 6 men with shovels, 1 cart loaded with railway sleepers, and a borrowed horse named Duchess. They worked through the evening, through the night, through the next day. By June 21st, they'd planted 127 obstacles across the most likely invasion beach in their sector. By June 23rd, 340 obstacles. By June 27th, 892 obstacles covering 4 miles of coastline. Other villages noticed. The problem was the Army kept saying no. Official defensive doctrine called for concrete pillboxes, steel dragon's teeth, professionally laid minefields. What Thomas was building wasn't in any engineering manual. It looked amateur. It looked desperate. It looked exactly like what it was. Farmers with shovels trying to stop panzers with sharpened wood. But the other villages weren't waiting for permission either. A grocer named William Finch in Dover started filling glass bottles with gasoline, adding a wick made from his wife's old curtains. He called them Finch's fire bottles. The Army called them Molotov cocktails and pretended they'd invented them. Between June 19th and July 31st, British civilians manufactured over 6 million improvised incendiary weapons in garages, barns and garden sheds across southern England. A schoolteacher named Margaret Hobbs in Kent realized that the road signs would guide German troops directly to London. She organized the children in her school to remove, reverse or repaint every road sign within 10 miles. When the Army found out, they threatened prosecution. When Churchill heard about it, he ordered every sign in Britain removed. By July 7, 1940, there were 0 directional signs anywhere in the United Kingdom. German invasion plans specifically noted this as significant obstacle to rapid advance. A fisherman named Edward Marsh in Cornwall noticed that German reconnaissance planes flew over at the same time each day, 7:15 a.m. and 5:45 p.m. He started building fake artillery positions using drainage pipes painted black, positioned them on hills overlooking the harbour, and covered them with camouflage nets. German intelligence photographs from July 1940 show 23 artillery batteries defending Cornwall. All were drainage pipes. The Germans diverted 3 panzer divisions to counter coastal guns that didn't exist. Thomas heard about the other villages, started sharing his designs. By July 15, 1940, over 400 villages across southern England had planted some version of Whitmore's teeth. The modifications were brilliant. Some added chains between the posts to catch motorcycles. Some angled them lower to rip up truck axles. Some poured concrete around the base to make them immovable. The British Army still refused to acknowledge them in official reports, but German reconnaissance started reporting Extensive unknown obstacles, non-standard pattern, purpose unclear. On July 16, 1940, Adolf Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 16, Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. Target date, August 15th. The directive included specific notes. British coast defences unexpectedly extensive. Obstacles of unknown type present along major landing beaches. Recommend additional reconnaissance. The additional reconnaissance revealed more problems. The drainage pipe artillery that didn't exist, the millions of fire bottles that did, the missing road signs, the hundreds of thousands of sharpened railway sleepers, the barbed wire strung across every field within 10 miles of the coast, the vehicles positioned to block roads, the trees cut down to create firing positions, the hastily dug trenches that looked useless in photographs but would force tanks to slow down, the fishing boats rigged with explosives and anchored in approach channels. None of it was professional. None of it was in military manuals. All of it was terrifying because German intelligence couldn't assess it. How do you calculate the combat effectiveness of a 43-year-old carpenter with a sharpened stick? How many panzer divisions does it take to defeat 5 million civilians who've decided not to surrender? The German High Command postponed the invasion. August 15th became August 31st. August 31st became September 15th. September 15th became indefinite postponement pending destruction of Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force won the Battle of Britain, but they won the time to fight it because Thomas Whitmore and 10,000 people like him convinced the German army that landing on British beaches would cost more than Germany could afford. The official military histories credit the Royal Navy and the RAF for stopping Operation Sea Lion. They mention some improvised obstacles in a single footnote on page 487. They don't mention Thomas Whitmore's name. They don't mention William Finch, Margaret Hobbs, or Edward Marsh. They don't mention the 15 million Home Guard volunteers who built 400,000 obstacles, manufactured 6 million fire bottles, dug 18,000 miles of trenches, and removed 47,000 road signs between June 17th and September 15th, 1940. German military analysis after the war estimated that these improvised defenses added between 18 and 31 days to their invasion timeline. Those 18 to 31 days gave the RAF the time to win the Battle of Britain. Those 18 to 31 days may have saved Britain from occupation. Thomas Whitmore never knew any of this. After the invasion threat passed, the Home Guard remained active until December 1944. Thomas served the entire time, still wearing the same brown wool jacket, still limping from the tractor accident, still carrying the telegram about James in his pocket. He was never promoted. He received no medals. When the Home Guard disbanded, he went back to carpentry, fixed doors, built shelves, occasionally constructed a coffin. He died in 1953, age 56, from pneumonia. The local newspaper ran a 4-line obituary. Thomas Whitmore, carpenter, served in Home Guard during war. Survived by Sister Agnes. Funeral Tuesday at St. Mary's Church. It didn't mention that his improvised obstacles had been studied by American military engineers before D-Day. It didn't mention that similar designs were used on Utah Beach. It didn't mention that he'd possibly saved thousands of lives by giving Britain time it didn't have. There's a small museum in the village now. In the back corner, behind the displays about the Battle of Britain, there's a single railway sleeper mounted vertically in a glass case. The placard reads, Home Guard Obstacle, circa 1940, designer unknown. 3 years ago, a researcher found Thomas's original drawings in a box of papers donated to the local historical society. The drawings were wrapped in a telegram dated June 16, 1940, announcing the death of Private James Whitmore at Dunkirk. The researcher submitted the drawings to the Imperial War Museum. They declined to display them. Insufficient historical significance, they wrote, not representative of professional military engineering. But here's what the German invasion plan said, dated July 19, 1940, captured after the war. British improvised obstacles present unexpected complications. Removal time estimated at 40 to 70 minutes per 100-meter sector under fire. Unacceptable delay for initial assault waves. Recommend alternative landing sites or substantial increase in combat engineers assigned to forward units. Germany never found acceptable alternative landing sites. Germany never assigned those combat engineers. Germany never invaded Britain. Maybe that railway sleeper in the village museum isn't historically significant. Maybe Thomas Whitmore doesn't deserve to be remembered alongside Churchill and the RAF pilots and the Royal Navy. Maybe sharpened sticks and stolen barbed wire and repainted road signs aren't the kind of heroism that gets taught in military academies. Or maybe the most important innovations in war aren't the ones that kill the enemy. Maybe they're the ones that buy time. Maybe they're the ones that create doubt. Maybe they're the ones that make the enemy ask, if a 43-year-old carpenter with a limp can do this, what else are they capable of? Thomas Whitmore never answered that question. But in June 1940, when Britain had nothing left to fight with except improvisation and stubbornness, he and thousands like him proved that sometimes the best defense isn't the one that looks professional. It's the one that makes the enemy think twice about testing it. If this story moved you, hit that like button to keep these forgotten stories alive. Subscribe so you never miss another account of ordinary people who changed history. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Did your family have a connection to the Home Guard or to Britain's defense in 1940? We want to hear your stories. Thank you for keeping their memory alive. The night of July 31st, 1940, changed everything. Thomas thought he understood about war. 11:43 p.m. The air raid sirens started wailing across the Sussex coast. Not the usual distant rumble of bombers heading to London. This was different. Low-flying aircraft. Close. Too close. Thomas grabbed his helmet and rifle and ran toward his position at the beach obstacle line. 17 other Home Guard volunteers were already there, crouching behind the improvised earthworks they'd built around the wooden stakes. The sound came first, a mechanical grinding that Thomas had never heard before, but recognized instantly from the newsreels he'd seen at the cinema. Tracked vehicles, heavy ones. Then the spotlights cut through the darkness from the channel. 6 German E-boats had beached themselves 400 yards offshore, and their deck lights were illuminating the beach. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was a probe, a test. Captain Ashford was shouting into the field telephone, trying to reach the army garrison 8 miles inland. The line was dead, cut or jammed, nobody knew which. "We're on our own," Ashford said, his voice cracking. "They're testing the defenses. They're testing us." Thomas could see them now. Shadows moving in the spotlight beams. Not soldiers, engineers. German combat engineers in their distinctive leather coats, carrying equipment, wire cutters, explosives, measuring tools. They were here to evaluate the obstacles, to time how long removal would take, to assess whether the sharpened railway sleepers were a real threat or just British desperation made visible. "Nobody fires," Ashford ordered. "We reveal our positions, they'll call in artillery, just watch." Thomas watched. The engineers reached the first line of obstacles at 11:52 p.m. 3 men approached the nearest railway sleeper, examined it for exactly 90 seconds, then tried to pull it free. It didn't move. One engineer took out a small notebook and wrote something. Another measured the depth of the hole with a calibrated rod. The third photographed it with a flash camera that lit up the beach like lightning. They moved to the next obstacle. Same procedure. 90 seconds of examination. Pulling, measuring, photographing, writing notes. Thomas realized what they were doing. They were creating a manual, a step-by-step guide for removing British improvised defenses. Every measurement they took, every photograph they captured, every note they wrote would go back to Germany and be distributed to every invasion unit. They'd practice on replicas. They'd develop specific tools. They'd train specialists. And when the invasion came, they'd know exactly how to dismantle everything Thomas had built. 12:07 a.m. The engineers had evaluated 11 obstacles. At this rate, they'd document the entire defensive system by 3:00 a.m., be back on their boats by 3:30 a.m., and Germany would have a complete intelligence assessment by morning. Thomas looked at the other men crouched in the darkness. William Marsh, the butcher, holding a shotgun he'd inherited from his father. David Cooper, the schoolteacher, gripping a hunting rifle with white knuckles. Robert Shaw, the postman, clutching 3 of Finch's homemade fire bottles. They were watching their entire defensive strategy being methodically dismantled by German efficiency. And then Thomas understood something else. The engineers weren't wearing combat gear. They had no infantry support visible on the beach. The E-boats were sitting stationary offshore with their lights on, making themselves perfect targets. This wasn't a combat operation. This was a scientific survey. They thought they were safe. They thought the Home Guard wasn't a real threat. They thought 17 men with hunting rifles and farm tools wouldn't dare engage German military personnel. They were right about one thing. Engaging them would reveal positions, might bring artillery, could start the invasion tonight instead of in 2 weeks. But they were wrong about something more important. "Captain," Thomas whispered, "they're taking our defense away. Every measurement they make, every photograph, that's our advantage gone." Ashford was silent for 30 seconds, then, "What are you thinking, Whitmore?" "I'm thinking we didn't build those obstacles to look frightening. We built them to work, and we're about to find out if they do." 12:13 a.m. Thomas stood up, fully visible in the spotlight beam. He walked down to the beach, boots crunching on the shingle, rifle slung over his shoulder. Walked right up to the nearest German engineer, who was photographing obstacle number 14. The engineer turned, startled, said something in German. Thomas didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, surprise mixed with contempt. This old man with a limp, wearing a carpenter's jacket under his Home Guard armband, carrying a rifle that looked like it might explode if fired. What was he going to do? Thomas reached down and grabbed the railway sleeper the engineer had just measured, lifted it out of its hole. 200 pounds of oak, sharpened point, 4 feet of wood that had been holding position for 6 weeks, held it like a pike, like a medieval weapon, like exactly what it was designed to be before rifles existed. "This is what it's for," Thomas said in English. The engineer's expression changed. He understood. Thomas drove the sharpened point forward, not at the man but at the camera in his hands. The point went through the camera body like it was paper, through the notebook behind it, through the leather satchel containing all the measurements and calculations. Destroyed 6 weeks of potential intelligence gathering in 3 seconds. The engineer stumbled backward, shouting. The other engineers turned. The spotlight operators on the E-boats swung their beams toward Thomas, and then William Marsh stood up, and David Cooper, and Robert Shaw, and 14 other men, all along the defensive line, each one picking up one of the obstacles they'd built, each one holding it like their ancestors had held pikes at Agincourt and Crécy. Not guns, not modern weapons, just sharpened wood and the willingness to use it. The German engineers ran, sprinted back toward the E-boats shouting, equipment abandoned. The boat's engines roared to life, the spotlights cut out. By 12:19 a.m., 6 minutes after Thomas had stood up, the beach was empty except for one abandoned leather satchel, one destroyed camera, and 17 men standing in the darkness, holding railway sleepers like they were guarding a medieval castle. Nobody spoke for 2 minutes. Then Captain Ashford started laughing, not hysteria, genuine laughter. "They came here to document our defenses," he said. "Instead, we documented theirs. We proved the obstacles work, not against tanks, against their confidence." Thomas planted the railway sleeper back in its hole, packed the dirt tight. "They'll put that in their report too," he said. "British Home Guard armed with sharpened sticks, willing to use them at close range, soldiers abandoned surveillance mission. That's what they'll write." The German report, captured after the war, stated exactly that. Filed August 1st, 1940. Intelligence assessment from Channel probe. British coastal defenders demonstrate unexpected aggression using improvised close combat weapons. Recommend substantial increase in initial assault force allocation. Home Guard units appear willing to engage at suicide range with primitive weapons. Standard doctrine insufficient for this opponent profile. The report included a recommendation to add 12,000 additional assault troops to the first invasion wave, specifically to handle fanatic civilian resistance with improvised weaponry. Germany didn't have 12,000 troops to spare. They needed those divisions in preparation for the eventual invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Sea Lion's requirements kept increasing. Every increase made invasion less feasible. Every delay made the Royal Air Force stronger. Every day Britain didn't surrender was another day Britain could prepare. On September 17, 1940, Adolf Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The official reason was failure to achieve air superiority. The classified reason, found in captured Wehrmacht documents, listed 17 factors. Factor number 9. British improvised coastal defences of unknown effectiveness, requiring disproportionate engineering and assault resources to overcome. Thomas Whitmore never saw that document, never knew his sharpened sticks had been mentioned in the same report that postponed the invasion of Britain. But on the morning of August 1, 1940, as the sun rose over the Sussex coast, he stood looking at the leather satchel the German engineers had abandoned. Inside were detailed technical drawings of British obstacles, measurements, calculations, and one photograph that hadn't been destroyed. A photograph of obstacle number 7, one of the first Thomas had built, with his initials carved into the base. TW June 19, 1940. The Germans had documented it, measured it, analyzed it, and then run away from it. Thomas kept the photograph, never showed it to anyone. After the war, his sister Agnes found it in his workshop, tucked inside his old toolbox between a worn chisel and a rusted saw blade. She didn't know what it meant. Threw it away when she cleaned out his workshop after he died. The photograph showed a sharpened railway sleeper, planted in beach sand, angled toward the sea. In the corner, barely visible, you could see the English Channel, and if you looked very carefully at the water in the background, you could see the shadow of an E-boat retreating. One photograph, one moment, one carpenter who proved that weapons don't have to be sophisticated to be effective. They just have to make the enemy uncertain about what comes next. Germany never found out what came next. They never tested Britain's improvised defences in actual combat. They never learned whether 17 men with sharpened sticks could actually stop an invasion. But they learned something more important. They learned they couldn't be certain those 17 men wouldn't try. And in war, uncertainty is sometimes the only weapon you need.